Hello and welcome back, listener. How are we doing? Well, thank you for downloading us again. It's certainly good to be back in your ears. You're listening to My Surrogacy Journey, the podcast. And as always, we are taking you on a journey through education and surrogacy storytelling. You just have me today. So I am Michael, one of your hosts and a dad through UK surrogacy. Me and my husband, Wes, have 2 children through surrogacy and egg donation. And we are considering our next journey. So we'll talk about that in a minute.
We are working with brand new sponsor for season 3, Manchester Fertility, the UK's leading specialist offering IUI, ICSI and IVF treatments, awarded Best Fertility Clinic in the northwest of England, along with earning a Patient Care Excellent Award.
I'm really looking forward to this episode. And the reason being is that I've spoken to this guest a number of times and we have met in person and we've had some really interesting chats on the My Surrogacy Journey Instagram when we did a live. And it got some really great engagement and some wonderful comments. So it was a no-brainer to invite this person back to the podcast. And this is quite a unique episode, and I'll explain more in a second. But first, I wanted to say hello to G. Hello.
Hi.
And how are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. I'm good. It's good to see you again. So thanks for being on the podcast.
It's a pleasure.
And we're going to talk all about you and your journey to being on this planet. And a little birdie tells me we also need to have a bit of a chat about what's also happening in your life as well. But let's start at the beginning. G, just explain to our lovely listener who you are and why surrogacy is important to you.
I am born through traditional surrogacy. I was born in 1998. I am in really close contact with my surrogate, and I also have 3 half-brothers through my surrogate, so genetically related. 2 are children of my surrogate herself, and 1 is a surrogate baby for a different family. Yeah, one big family, lots of connections, and clearly a really important part of my life. So I've always known I was born through surrogacy from day dot, and that's been really important to my journey. And that was the same with my half-brother as well, who's also born through surrogacy. So we've always spoken about it. We always chat about it. We're in really good contact, and nothing's ever been a secret or hidden or something I'm not aware of.
Amazing. So let us look and talk then about, I guess, the journey to you being here. So if you don't mind, share for our listener who may be someone considering surrogacy. They may also be a person born through surrogacy or egg donation. So fill us in with your journey to being on this planet.
My parents met when they were a little bit older, in their 30s, and they tried for children for a long time. They went through multiple cycles of IVF. Firstly with my mum's own eggs, and then they went through with donor eggs. And I think that was a really key point of the journey, because once they'd made the decision to go forward with donor eggs in IVF, when that was unsuccessful, the natural next step was to look at surrogacy, and actually the genetic kind of component of that by that point didn't faze them, because they were already exploring routes with donor eggs anyway. And they then went to a surrogacy agency called COTS, and that agency at that time was in the UK facilitating matching up surrogates and intended parents. They had a profile that they submitted, and my surrogate was sent profiles of a few couples, and she chose the profile of my parents to carry for. And my parents were delighted because she'd also done surrogacy before. So for them, that was an extra level of reassurance.
Okay, I didn't pick up on that previously. So she'd already carried a surrogacy pregnancy first.
Yeah, so she's got a son of her own who's 4 years older than myself. I've got a half-brother who's a surrogate-born person who's 2 years older than me. And then there's me, and then there's one more child of her own.
Phenomenal. So let's unpack some of that then. So surrogacy in the mid to late 90s was not that common.
Yeah, really uncommon.
And how did your parents come across surrogacy?
So it was something that was mentioned to them by a doctor who was also called Georgina, which is why I'm called Georgina. So that's where my name comes from, at the Nottingham Fertility Clinic. And that's because that's where they'd been having their IVF. And clearly that hadn't been successful. And therefore, it was something that the doctors mentioned about had they considered surrogacy.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't something they had really considered before. But when they had that mentioned to them, they looked at it in the context of all the other options, things like adoption as well. And they decided actually surrogacy was the right path for them.
Firstly, for a healthcare professional and a fertility professional to mention surrogacy, generally, we're always celebrating that, because for some people, it's never normally the pathway they would ordinarily choose. But for that to be suggested back in 97, probably even earlier, is something that I'm really surprised about and obviously pleased for. How did they approach surrogacy when they finally met and spoke to the wonderful Kim Cotton? And tell us about any apprehensiveness or how they viewed surrogacy of what they knew before they engaged and then what that looked like afterwards.
As you say, it was really uncommon back then. So there wasn't a lot of information, and I think they were quite isolated because there weren't things like podcasts and Facebook, and it was hard to find other people going through that type of thing. My parents' ultimate aim was to have a child, and this was how they were going to be able to achieve that. So for them, that was their focus, and the kind of genetic element they'd already managed with before with their decision. So that element was also removed for them, which I think was helpful. I think reflecting back, one thing that they would definitely say is that the process of surrogacy has made them interact with and get to know and form bonds with people that they would never have normally met. And that's one thing they've really loved about the process, because my surrogate is someone that my parents, as two, university academics, would never have come across in society. And actually to have a common aim with someone who's so different, and this aim to be so strong that you all work together to achieve it, is something that they are really proud of, and they really adore their relationship with my surrogate.
What I love about these types of conversations is what you have just explained is no different than the majority of people's surrogacy journeys either. It tends to be this gorgeous collision of characters that people that you would have never have had those paths cross. The net result of all of that wonderfulness is a brand new family and friends for life.
Yeah.
And that was happening way back in the beginning, in that first decade of when surrogacy was still fairly new and path that was untrodden. Something's just sprung to my mind. So apologies for this random question.
That's all right.
With a lack of technology, because I know how obviously at My Surrogacy Journey, how we do things and our portal and our algorithm and how we match, with the exception of email still being very new and only having fax machines, how were profiles even shared back in those days?
So they submitted them on a paper document and they were then posted out to my surrogate. So my surrogate received three paper documents with different profiles on. And I've spoken with her about why she chose to match with my parents, because, clearly that's a decision that made me be me. And I was fascinated about what made her choose that. And she said that it was the picture of my parents, and particularly my dad's kind of geeky, nerdy smile. She thought, okay, these are the people that I want to carry for next. So in the time before, Instagram, Facebook, and even really emails, still the kind of visual stuff was really important in terms of making those connections. That's been obviously vital to where I am now.
And is that profile still in existence somewhere?
Oh, I've never seen it, but I'd love to see the picture.
That's why I'm asking. I'm really curious to this really cool geeky smile.
I know. I'll have to ask my parents and my surrogate whether they've still got it. And maybe that's something to be framed.
Yeah, for sure it is. So let's hear about your incredible surrogate then. So for the benefit of maybe a new listener here now, explain what traditional surrogacy is for us.
So traditional surrogacy is where the surrogate is the biological parent of the child as well as the gestational carrier. So at that point, this was achieved using home inseminations, and that means that my surrogate is, I have half of her genetics as well as the fact that she carried me, which is different to gestational surrogacy, where it's either a donor egg or the couple's own embryo that's then implanted, and there's then not a genetic connection with the surrogate.
Incredible. Thank you for that gorgeous explanation. Let's move on then, and let's start talking about that journey for you as a child born through surrogacy. What networks were being built for you and your family and your extended network and family, with a view of when it was appropriate to start having those conversations?
So from what I'm aware, when my parents joined COTS, there was a big emphasis on the fact that we needed to be honest with children and tell them from the beginning about their origins. And that was a real focus of COTS and remains a focus of COTS. And that was something that my parents absolutely embraced and took on board. And that's what they did. So from the very beginning, they were telling me stories, they were talking about my surrogate. We used to meet up a couple of times a year with my surrogate and her children, and also my half brother and his parents. Those were really fun days. We'd go to the zoo or we'd go to a park and spend time together. And particularly growing up as an only child in my household, having semi-regular contact with my half siblings, regardless of genetic, background or not, we are half siblings, and that was really important for me to get to know them, but also put into context how this family all fits together. And I was never confused because I knew my surrogate's role in my life, and I had this contact with my half siblings, and our extended families all had contact. So actually it just made sense, and we could then talk about who everyone was and remember that time when, so and so did this, and it was just part of normality.
And I guess for you and for your family, for your parents, the boundary was set really early on. So there was no confusion with you. You knew the role everyone played, and your mother is your mother, regardless of giving birth or genetics. Was there ever a moment for you as a teen or an older child? And I'm interested from a personal point of view with this question. Was there ever a moment of curiosity or teenage angst or anger that you felt a disconnect, or did you never experience anything like that?
I don't think necessarily I did. I think the only point I was ever confused about my parentage, ironically, was when I was about 9 or 10, and I was chatting to my friend about surrogacy. And, my friends were all very aware of this at primary school, and we had loads of chats about it, and that was really great. And my best friend said to me one day, out of nowhere, I get who your mum is. I've got it. Your mum's your mum. And I get that you've got this surrogate. But who's your dad? And I remember being suddenly struck with the fact that actually, you're right. Like, no one ever tells me who my dad is. Like, my dad's my dad. But, genetically, there was never any discussion about I'm your dad and I'm your genetic dad, because
True, actually.
He's just my dad. And I remember going home and asking my mum, and she thought this was hilarious because clearly my dad was my dad. And there was never anything, unusual about that part of the whole story. But because no one had ever spoken about it, you suddenly think, well, there could be other things that you aren't aware of.
And that's the thing, this is classic of the society that we live in, that the assumption is always on the female, or the female receives a slightly different viewpoint on this particular topic. And it's so interesting because this could have been a double donation, and everyone would just assume that because of the nature of how you were conceived, that of course your dad's your dad. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah, no, and that was the only point I ever needed a clarity on, in the midst of actually the role of mum being the much more complicated side of the family in terms of with the biology and who my mum was, and my mum being my mum. The only question I ever had was about my dad.
How strange. How nice for your mum's sake, really, I guess, to sort of not have that added bit of pressure around that topic, because you do sometimes understand when there is genetic loss, how that parent copes with it. I know it was a big concern of mine with me not being genetically linked to my son, but very quickly, once I held my son, he was my son, and you then think, what the hell was I worried about? It's totally irrelevant. And was that the case with your mom? Was there ever that conversation between the two of you with regards to either you developing a different relationship with your surrogate or keeping in contact?
My mum's been always very supportive of my contact with my surrogate. And there's never been any kind of concerns from her perspective about having any contact with my surrogate or family. I think it's also important to acknowledge that, particularly in the dynamic of a heterosexual couple who didn't know they had fertility challenges, you start to imagine what your children are going to look like and what they might be like. And there is a sense of loss when you end up going down a different path, particularly losing the genetic connection with your child. And that doesn't make my mum any less my mum, because for every single second of my life, she's been my mum. But from that parent perspective, I think it's important to acknowledge those differences. And particularly in the case of my parents, when my mum is 5'0", fair, ginger haired, blue eyes. I'm really tall, really dark featured. She is probably sitting there as a young adult, never imagined her daughter would look like me. And that doesn't make me any less of her daughter. But I think it's important to acknowledge people's ideas and things that they think about have to change slightly when you're going down a journey like this. But being open and being honest with that is really important in this kind of journey.
Just like it's one of COTS missions and continues to be the same for us in terms of that, transparency and open and honest, and with the welfare of that child at the center of all of this. And I know that was certainly how your entire family and surrogate and wider family treated this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having that open and honesty is really important. Talking about times that are difficult and talking about times that are brilliant are also really important. Some couples will know very early on, homosexual couples or people with known fertility challenges from very young, that this is going to be their journey. But there are other people that come to this through a lot of trauma and medical challenges and miscarriages, and they're people that maybe need different kind of support in their journey. But ultimately, supporting people to feel as the parents they are, my parents are my parents. They're no different to anyone else's parents. And making sure that we empower them from the beginning to be no different to anybody else is what's best for the child. Because having empowered parents who are confident in their role and don't feel different, don't feel less of a parent because they're taking this journey, is what makes them parents in the same right as everyone else, and that what makes a happy family and is the best thing for the child.
Gorgeously put, super powerful, and pays the parents the respect because of the anxiety that they are probably facing at that moment when surrogacy is offered to them as a way to become parents. Because you're right, for the majority of people, or for 50% of the people certainly exploring it, it's never the first option.
No.
And for your parents, that was never the case either. So when it is, we sing praise and we celebrate them just as much as any other parent.
Exactly. Very few people go into parenthood thinking the way I really want to do it is through surrogacy. It's this place that people end up at, which is still a wonderful place and has so many beautiful things about it, but it's generally not their first choice. And making sure that they still feel positive and not like they've failed or not like they're stigmatized or different in this space, which is really scary for them to be exploring, is the most important thing. Because kids are flexible. Like the kids born out of surrogacy, we're open and honest with them. Kids accept all sorts of things and are just sponges for their surroundings. And what we need to make sure of is that their surroundings are strong.
Amen to that one.
Absolutely.
So you are still very connected very much to the donor conception world. Yep. And I last saw you at a Donor Conception Network event for one of their celebrations this year. It's probably an obvious question, but explain why the connection to the donor conception world is something that you are really passionate about.
I mean, surrogacy and donor conception are different things. And I'll start with that because I think sometimes people think they're interchangeable and they're not, they're different. But I think that donor conception clearly has an overlap with surrogacy, and particularly with it now being less of an overlap because there's more kind of embryos being used in surrogacy as opposed to traditional surrogacy. It's important still to acknowledge and talk about how traditional surrogacy is different and how the genetic connection to your surrogate does change things slightly. I mean, even in my case, things like having genetic half siblings within different families, if we weren't genetically connected, maybe the importance of staying in touch with them might have been different. But actually, because we are half siblings, we're really similar, we're all connected through our surrogate and through our genetics, that makes keeping in touch really important. So sharing that within the donor conception network or donor conception space is an important part of the story.
Really is. I don't think it's said enough, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I think very often when people explore traditional surrogacy, and whether that's because they want their surrogate to also be their donor, or whether for some people it could even be finances and the triggering nature of doing IVF again and creating a child in an environment that is less clinical could be an appeal to a particular set of intended parents or person.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there are lots of reasons why people make the decision to go down the route of traditional surrogacy. And it is just a different route with different sets of challenges. It's no better, it's no worse. But
totally agree.
There are things that crop up in that space that make it unique and therefore important to kind of consider the implications and consider how you manage that, because it is a different thing to manage than having a donor who you maybe don't know or using your own genetics, and kind of looking at those issues in the context of surrogacy, but with the background of donated eggs or in the background of traditional surrogacy with the surrogate's own eggs, means that you just have thought through all the steps that are involved and how you're going to manage those going forward.
Again, I couldn't agree more. I think from a conversation I remember having with Nina at Burning Conception Network, because we have a child with a known donor and we have a child with an anonymous donor, and having that conversation with Duke is fairly straightforward because we can put everything into the relevant box and unpack it all at the same time.
Yeah.
And we can't do that with Talulah because we won't know until she's 18.
Yeah.
And I think in your case, again, and a lot of people would probably agree, you can unpack everything fairly straightforward if you choose to.
Yeah.
And therefore the welfare of that child is protected and secure because you've got donation and surrogate all covered off, and it's nice and easy, or easier to manage because it can be done all at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, there's no unknowns in my case. And that's what I feel for me has been really important. The story might be complicated or more complicated than other stories, but there's no unknowns. I know who everyone is. There may be, half siblings, and there may be my surrogate's family, but everyone has a place that I understand and that can be explained. And for me, that's brilliant. But I can see from parents' perspectives, maybe that's scary, having someone that as the biological donor or as the kind of biological other parent in that sense. Maybe it's easier to have somebody you don't know. And that decision's equally, if people are feeling that way, that's equally as valid. And it just means there's a different set of challenges there.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I think accessing that right support to understand the challenges and the hurdles and, where and when things need unpacking and talking about, I think is part of that process, either to parenthood or then beyond.
Yeah, and having the language to do that, having the words, having the skills and thinking about how you're going to do that. So my parents used the phrase tummy mummy because I was in her tummy, and to me that made sense. But having the words to describe who the people are, even if they are anonymous and you don't, you can't put a name to them, having a word to describe their role, I think is useful.
Yeah, agreed. Let's move on to something a bit more personal now, if that's okay. I can see like you're grinning away. Your life's about to get a little bit crazy.
Yeah. So my husband and I got married last summer, and we are expecting a baby in November.
Oh, it's soon then.
Yeah, it's soon.
Okay. And how's everything?
Yeah. So all is going really well. Growing this evolving family is just going to continue.
Totally. And congratulations from all of us.
Thank you.
How are your parents feeling about this next chapter? Are they excited?
Yeah, they're super excited. We were really fortunate that we managed to tell both of my parents face to face, despite the fact we live a long way away from both of them. And they were absolutely over the moon. So that was really nice.
Congratulations anyway. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So then once baby's here and everything's then, getting real, you're having some time off work. What's the plan for next year?
Well, yeah, certainly some time off work. I work as a doctor in the NHS, so I'm not sure if having a baby is going to be a rest or harder work than work, but we'll see. Having some time to just enjoy, spend time with family. We're having a girl, So I can say she.
I didn't know that. Okay, gorgeous.
It's weird saying they now. We've got to the point we say she. Making sure she spends loads of time with family, maybe doing some traveling. We'd like to spend some time in France because Ferdy's half French, so spending some time over there and making sure she's kind of experienced a bit of the French culture and the language is going to be really, really special.
Of course it will. And I'm so envious of when you see families with these gorgeous tiny humans that are bilingual. I think it's just one of the most gorgeous things to witness.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something we've both been really passionate about. You know, I did French GCSE, but that makes me no expert. Ferdy's family are, all fluent in French, and he'll speak to the child in French. So that'll be a really, really amazing skill that she'll have that we wanted to make sure was passed on.
That is gorgeous. But surnames are still unsettled on, I hear.
Yeah, surnames are still unsettled. Message to everyone, make sure you decide your surname before you get married. I thought being introduced to happy couple would be simple, but a year on, we're still none the wiser.
I love the fact that a year later, like, what is our married name?
Yeah, we'll have to decide that before baby's actually here and she's registered.
Yeah, I think you should. You've got a couple of months, so you best get cracking.
Exactly.
Look, G, it's always an absolute pleasure hearing from you. I think your story is not only speaking to an adult born through surrogacy is just a reminder to me of how something so incredible is really normalized and has been throughout all of your life, which I think is, for anyone that has just arrived at the doorstep of surrogacy, you are living and breathing proof that you did absolutely all right. You are working in medicine, you are completely unscathed. You're a massive ambassador for this particular sector and group of people. Is there any closing remarks you'd like to give, or any words of wisdom for either children born through surrogacy or even those parents that are now considering egg donation and surrogacy?
Yeah, I suppose for people born through surrogacy who might be listening to this, I feel like being born through surrogacy is such a privileged position because I'm born in a way which is really unusual. And I feel a bit of a responsibility for advocating for that and discussing challenges and discussing how we improve the law and discussing all these things to help educate. So if anyone is sitting there, they've been born through this method, they're not sure how they feel or they have things they want to say, reach out to people, spread the word, and whatever that message is that you want to share, it's really valuable education for people around you, whether it's good, whether there's been difficulties. I think that's kind of an important point. For those that are sitting there thinking, do I go down this route, or exploring this for the first time, talking to family and friends, really thinking about how this fits in with your life and how you envisage your future to look like, and achieving that and being confident in the decisions you make. Ultimately, I'm sitting here not damaged through surrogacy. I feel privileged to have been born this way. And I think making sure you go into it with confidence that this is a decision you've made and actually your child will be fine. It's scary, it's different, it's unusual, but you've got to talk, communicate, and have fun.
Perfect words of wisdom from the wonderful G. G, thank you so much for giving up some of your time today. I'm going to let you get back on with the rest of your afternoon. You've been an amazing guest. Thank you so much, and all the best with everything in November. Don't forget to send some photos. Please give this little girl a surname, and I look forward to hearing from you real soon.
Absolutely. I will definitely make sure she's got a surname and of course share some pictures. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you. That was such a fascinating episode. I know you would have loved it because I did. There were some little nuggets of surprises there for me too. I didn't know she was having a little girl, so how exciting is that? If you've loved this episode, then please make sure you subscribe for more little nuggets of gorgeousness like today's episode.
So don't forget, if you need your podcast fix, we're back every Monday, proudly sponsored by Manchester Fertility, the UK's leading specialist offering IUI, ICSI and IVF treatments, awarded Best Fertility Clinic in the northwest of England. If you like this episode, then please subscribe to the series. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.